Good morning and welcome to Planet in the Word, week 11. And this week you are going to be reading a lot about numbers in the book of Numbers. I think the entire week is all contained in the book of Numbers. Now, the book of Numbers, we get that name in English because in Greek it's called arithmoi, and in Latin, the Vulgate, it's called numeri, which are both words that mean numbers or the numbering. It's actually because there are two censuses. You would think it would be censi, but it's not. It is two censuses that are taken in the book of Numbers. The first one when they came out of the land of Egypt, and the second one when they were preparing 40 years later to go into the promised land. Now, in Hebrew, the book of Numbers is called Bamidbar, which means really in the wilderness, which is part of the opening of the book. Talks about they were in the wilderness. And in this book, differently than Leviticus, Leviticus is really laying out to the Israelites how he wants to be worshiped. He gives the pattern for the tabernacle and how he wants the Israelites to lay up their camp, how he wants to be worshiped. He talks about the appointed times, the holy days, the feast days. He gives a lot of that information in Leviticus. But when we get to Numbers, one of the things that God really drills down on is the Levitical tribe and what he's expecting from them. Now, remember, God took the tribe of Levi for his own. They were to act as intermediaries between him and the Israelites. So in about the middle of the book of Numbers, you're going to have what is most commonly referred to as the rebellion of Korah. Now, a lot of times we read that story in isolation and we're not exactly sure the context for that. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time now giving you some context about why that rebellion took place and what was the issue that Korah was really having and why was he having an issue. And what it really comes down to is understanding the dynamics within the tribe of Levi. So one of the easiest ways to do that is to really look at a family tree. And this helps us to navigate moving forward who some of these components and groups were and what the interplay was between them, and then what that led to after this time, even going into the promised land. So let's start out with the tribe of Levi as it went into Egypt when Jacob is moved by Joseph and all of the sons of Israel come into Egypt. So Levi had with him at that point 3 sons. Now, his 3 sons were Gershom, Kohath, and Merari. And we're going to drill down on Kohath's 4 sons. So while they're in Egypt, Kohath, the middle child, has 4 sons: Amram, Itzar, Hebron, which is what the part of Israel is named after, and Uzziel. Now, what we need to go and one step further from that, Kohath's firstborn, Amram, had 2 sons, Aaron and Moses, and of course his daughter Miriam. Kohath's secondborn, Itzar, he had Korah. So if you look at those 2, what you quickly understand when you see the family tree is Korah is a cousin to Aaron and Moses. They are both Kohathites. That was important because God separated the jobs of Gershom, Kohath, and Merari into 3 separate parts. So Korah, Aaron, and Moses were all descendants of Kohath, but Aaron and Moses were descendants of the firstborn, Amram, and Korah was the descendants of the second child. So they are cousins. So what's happening in number 16? Well, Korah has gotten his panties in a wad, and he and a group of his friends are really upset. And I'm going to read you the verse that's sort of culminating. There's this tension building. There's this basically jealousy because Aaron and Moses are acting as the sole set apart go-between between Yahweh and the tribes of Israel. And really what's happening here is that Korah and his two friends who are from the tribe of Reuben. So I'm not exactly sure, other than that Reuben was the original firstborn, why the descendants of Reuben felt that they had a right to stand on the fact that they should be the mediaries between God and the Israelites. But they're sort of all working together, and they're really upset and sort of jealous that Aaron and Moses have sort of this authority that they don't have. And really one of the things that's happened is that the Kohathites were really set apart, different than the tribes of Gershom and Merari. But even within the Kohathites, only the descendants of Aaron, only Aaron's children, were to be the priesthood, the set apart, those that could go as intermediaries between Yahweh and the Israelites. And Korah is really upset about this, and he's upset about the way that he feels that they are getting some favoritism. And it finally comes to a head, and I'm going to read to you Numbers 16:3 so that you can sort of hear his culminating speech, if you will. So this is Numbers 16:3. And it says, "They assembled together against Moses and Aaron and said to them, 'You have gone far enough. For all the congregation are holy, every one of them, and Yahweh is in their midst. So why do you exalt yourselves above the assembly of the Lord?'" So really what he's saying is, we're all holy. Who do you think you are that you can exalt yourself to be only the intermediary before Yahweh? And so, of course, what we have is we have a testing. And what ends up happening is ultimately everyone who acts in rebellion, questioning how Yahweh had set up and chosen Aaron's family to serve him, they are ultimately destroyed. And Korah and his friends are uniquely killed in a manner that Moses basically says when the Lord rejects him. Listen, if the Lord has rejected you, you're not just going to die, but you're going to die in a manner that has never been seen before. And this is where the ground opens up and swallows Korah, and also the entire wives and children of the families of the Reubenites. Now, why the difference between Korah's punishment and the punishment to the Reubenite families? Well, the Bible doesn't actually say, except that we do know that it specifically addresses that God did not take all of Korah's family. In fact, it says in Numbers 26:11, "The sons of Korah, however, did not die." Now, in this story, there's two things to really note that I think are very interesting. As you're reading through Numbers this week, and you're reading this story of Korah, the rebellion of the groups that really are annoyed that they feel that Aaron and Moses have appointed themselves and God is actually affirming what he has chosen. Something to remember is we need to be really grateful that God did not take out the entire family. He did not kill Korah's sons, because from Korah's sons, we actually get Samuel. That's a really fun thing to know in advance. These are the family and the heritage of Samuel. God is in the redeeming business, and I think that's just a really sweet thing to know. The second thing I'd like you to pay attention to as you're reading through Numbers is God takes, I think it's in 4, 5, and 6. Nope, it's in 3, 4, and 5. In chapters 3, 4, and 5, God divides the Levites, his tribe, those that are going to live completely scattered among the Israelites in the promised land, those that are going to be given territory, but their livelihood is going to be dependent upon Yahweh for provision. God divides them into 3 sections. And those 3 sections have 3 different purposes. When God gave the specific directions for the tabernacle and the way that it was to be built, there needed to be a way for them to transport it in the wilderness. And the way they were to do that is they were to break it down and divide it into sections. So if we consider that the tabernacle was built sort of like a body, in that it had curtains and rods, or curtains and screens and fabric and outer courts and inner courts, if we sort of look at that as a flesh sort of, it had skin around it, right? It was made out of fabric, but the idea is that it literally had a structure to it, and then it had rods and bars and posts and pillars, and those were the things that held the screens and the tent fabric. And then the last thing that it had all the inner workings. It had the lampstand, it had the altar, it had the altar of incense, the table of showbread, the Ark of the Covenant. Now, God ends up dividing each of those components of the tabernacle into 3 parts. And each of the tribes of the descendants of Levi were organized in a way that they were to be the responsible ones for each one of those 3 parts. Well, what do I mean by that? Well, if you look at what God assigns Gershom, God assigns the tribe of Gershom, well, that's probably not, the family or clan of Gershom, all being Levites. They're responsible for taking down the curtains, the screens, all the things that are fabric. They're responsible for transporting those through the wilderness. And if you look at it in a way, they're responsible for transporting the skin, the outside, the body. If you look at Merari was responsible for the pillars, the crossbars, the clasps, all those metal posts and things that everything was assembled on. It's really sort of like the bone structure of the tabernacle. They were responsible for transporting that in the wilderness. So what was Kohath responsible for transporting? Well, they were to lower down over and cover the holy set apart items that were inside the tabernacle, the table of showbread, the Ark of the Covenant. They were responsible. They had to cover those, and then only the tribe of Kohath could go in and bear theirs on their shoulders. Where everything else could be transported on cart, Kohath had to hand carry each of the innermost things. I like to look at it like Kohath was responsible for transporting the soul. They were responsible for transporting all the inner workings, those things that God required them to make off of the pattern of the temple that is in heaven. Those earthly things that were used to commune with God. Kohath was responsible for carrying those things themselves physically, and those things that related to the soul of the relationship between the Israelites and Yahweh. I just think it's a really sweet picture. So pay attention to those things as you're reading this week. I hope you find that you see things you've never seen before. Thank you for stopping by. Have a good week. Bye-bye.